Hey there, this is Ross Izzard, and this is the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast, where we talk about fly fishing in more interesting places. Last week, we talked about packing for self-reliance, which is, I think, the most critical component of going out there. It doesn't matter if you're doing streams or lakes or whatever. You need to be packed in a way that you can be self-reliant, that you have what you need, that you can be safe without somebody having to bail you out. And you got to have that kind of in order before you can go anywhere else. Okay, so that was kind of our foundation. But now I want to talk about more specifically planning fishing trips, right? So the fishing side of this, deciding where you're going to go. And I want to talk specifically about timing your trips to high-alpine lakes. Now, look, I know not all of you live in places with high-alpine lakes. For those of you who don't have mountains, I'm sorry. I really am, because high-alpine lakes are one of the great joys of fly fishing, and especially backcountry fly fishing. I spend a huge amount of my summer hiking to various backcountry lakes to fish for cutthroat and brook trout, and sometimes golden trout and other fancy things like lake trout. It's a big part of what I do. I look forward to it all year. And there's this incredibly short window, at least here in Colorado, where we really get to go and do that. And it's just a huge part of the game for me. So if you don't have high alpine lakes out of the gate, I'm going to say that I'm sorry. But number one, you might still find this interesting because it turns out trout are trout everywhere you go. Number two, you should be planning a trip to somewhere that does have high alpine lakes, because if you're a fly fisher, this is something you got to do. You got to experience. It's part of it, and you're going to love it. I promise. And number three, I don't know, you might move at some point, right, and go somewhere else. I don't know if I want you to move to Colorado. No offense. I'm sure you're a wonderful person, but we have so many wonderful people here that I just am not sure that we need anymore. But who knows where you might find yourself, and this might come in handy for one of those days. So with that, let's go ahead and hop in. I don't think we need a big intro here. We're talking about how to time your next trip to a high alpine lake, and specifically how to do that in the sort of earlier summer phase, right? So runoff is rocking. It usually is rocking for all of June and part of July. That's a great time maybe to start getting up to these lakes, but with the understanding that the lakes have their own schedule. They don't care about you. And depending on where they are and how high they are and how they're oriented, north, south, or east, west, where in the state they happen to be, a whole bunch of other factors. They might be open and they might not. And how you figure out when you're going to go, especially in this kind of earlier phase, it's a pretty big deal. And I am aware of the fact that this is going to go up in July. Most lakes will be iced off by then, but not all. I have been to lakes in August that are still partially frozen. There are many lakes that are only unfrozen, especially at very high elevations, for like a couple of weeks every year. And so, yes, a lot of them will be iced off, especially down around that 10,000, 11,000, maybe even 12,000 mark. But that doesn't mean all of them will be. And so don't make the mistake of getting out there and packing up to one of these things only to find that it's frozen. I did that for many, many, many years. I just sort of took my chances, right? And I had my rule of thumb. I said, okay, lakes at 10,000, between 10 and 11,000 feet are probably good in like late May, early June. Lakes between 11,000 and 12,000 feet, they start opening up in June. Lakes above 12,000 feet, it's really like a July, early or mid-July. Stuff above that, like really high lakes, 12.6, 12.7, 13, those are not open until August. And this is kind of how I planned it out, right? But what happened is that I would go up there, I'd hike up to these places, often through really brutal terrain, often in snow, which is exhausting, as most of you probably know if you've ever done it. And I would find a lake frozen or frozen enough that it wasn't really worth fishing. That means, obviously, that I didn't get to fish. It means that I put a lot of effort into getting to those places, and they're still beautiful, so I don't want to say it was wasted time. But it's not something that I would really do on purpose very often, right? I'd rather know if they're frozen or not. And now, for a long time, there just wasn't much you could do about it. You could look at reports, you could read stuff online, you could use your best guesses of when you've seen them before, but there was a lot of trial and error, and you sometimes got it wrong. And then I discovered the Copernicus program, okay, and it changed my life. Some of you might already know about the Copernicus program, but I bet a lot of you don't, because I didn't for a really long time. And in fact, it's a relatively recent discovery for me. But the Copernicus program is part of the EU's European Space Agency Earth observation program. This is how they eyeball the Earth over there in Europe. And they use a network of satellites called the Sentinel satellites to take almost constant images of the planet as the satellites are flying around. And they are as close to real-time images as you can possibly get. So when you go on the browser, and I will post the link to the Copernicus browser, it's sort of clunky and sort of awkward. And honestly, you'd probably never find it unless you knew where to look. So I will make sure I post the link in the show notes. But when you go on there, you can set it for, the most recent data of an area. It'll show you historical data and other stuff, but you can set it to the most recent data, and you can do it by cloud cover. So you can actually say, okay, I don't want anything that's above 30% cloud cover. Or I want the most recent day that was 30% cloud cover or below, because obviously you're looking at satellite images, and if there are a bunch of clouds, you won't be able to see anything on the ground. But it gets you pretty close. If you're lucky, it might give you same day. At the least, I'd say it's going to give you something within 5 days or maybe a week. And it provides really pretty decent imaging. Now, these are not super high res images. You're not going to be able to zoom in and see your dog in the backyard, but they're high res enough that you can see what the status of these lakes is. You can see that this one is iced off completely, and that one is still completely frozen and covered in snow. And this one is iced off, but only at the inlet, and it looks like it's going to be tough to access. And that system is such an incredible power tool, because it means that you can check on an ongoing basis when these lakes are going to open, because it fluctuates every year, right? You can have your rule of thumb, you can guess at it. You're probably going to be pretty close most of the time. I mean, experience definitely matters. But being able to look at them with a God's eye view and say, okay, that one's open and that one's not, is the number one step toward planning a successful trip to a high alpine lake. Because if you know the water's open, you know you can fish it. Probably. We're going to talk about some mitigating factors here in a little bit. But it gives you the confidence to know that if you can reach the lake, it's going to be open for you. So Copernicus browser, yeah, I guess it's kind of cheating. 100 years ago, the frontiersmen, I don't know, that was probably longer than 100 years ago, but you get my drift. Didn't get to use this stuff, and I get it. But look, we live in the technological age. It's 2025. We got satellites flying all over in space. And by God, if I can use space technology to make my fishing trips better and catch more fish, I'm going to do that. Of course I am. So are you. Come on, we're not silly here. We know what we're doing. So check that out and use it and check it on a regular basis to make sure that the lakes you're going to are open before you go. Once you've done that, you got to answer the question of whether or not you can reach the lake. Okay. And this is also a question, it's kind of a question of timing and of gear. I was just out this week. Actually, I just got back today, going up to a lake at about 11:02. It's a series of lakes. The lower lake was open. The upper lake was also open. And then the really upper lake, the highest lake, was not. And I knew that, and I went up there, and I expected there to be a fair amount of snow cover, but there was a lot of snow cover up there. And it's interesting because the week before that, I was at a different lake at about 11,200 feet, and there was still snow up there. Of course, there's always snow up there, even well into June and sometimes into July and August. But there wasn't as much snow up there because that lake sits in a different basin with different dynamics. It's oriented differently, which means it catches the sun differently and warms differently. There are just a whole bunch of different factors that can mean that it can be tough to know whether or not you can access a given lake. And unfortunately, this is one of those times where you really can't use experience from other lakes to guide you, right? If you were to take my experience that I just mentioned and say, okay, well, you didn't have trouble getting to that 11.2 lake. Now, granted, I did have to use snowshoes for part of that. So, take that as you will. But then to sort of push that into, that means I should be able to reach this other lake over here that's roughly at the same elevation. Well, no, maybe not, right? Because there can be terrain features and different ridge lines and sun angles and other stuff that I mentioned that can really affect how much snow is on the ground. And how much snow is on the ground is going to affect whether or not you can access these lakes in a couple of key ways. The first one is obviously walking on snow is hard, right? It probably means that you're going to need snowshoes if you're going to be on serious snow. Even if stuff that you think is packed, you can slip through one of those trap doors and you can very easily break your leg. In fact, I have almost already done that once this season. And I'm going to do a whole episode about how stupid I was and how you shouldn't be like me. but you're going to need spikes. You may need snowshoes. You might need other equipment. And in some cases, you just can't get there, right? So when I slipped and fell through, I was attempting to make it to that middle lake. I just couldn't reach it. I got to within about 300 feet of the lake, and I almost hurt myself, and it became too dangerous and too sketchy for me to be able to actually reach the thing. So I had to turn back, and I still caught my fish in the lower lake and had a great time camping and fishing, but I wasn't able to access that upper lake. So snow is definitely a factor, okay? And you need to keep that in mind. The next factor is stream crossings, okay? So especially during runoff, there's all the snow up there. It's all melting off. There's tons of water coming off the mountain. There are chances that you're going to have to do stream crossings. And in some cases, on some hikes, you might have to do multiple stream crossings. And that's a whole different ballgame for a few reasons, right? One, maybe a bridge is out and you have to actually get in the water. Maybe there is no bridge and you have to cross the water. That raises a whole bunch of interesting quandaries for you. You could get wet, right? Which maybe isn't a problem if it's super warm, but at elevation, it might not be super warm and you might not want to be soaked all day. You can get your feet and your hiking boots wet because even if they're waterproof, if the water comes over the top, guess what? They're not waterproof anymore. Now you got wet socks and cold feet. If you've ever hiked in wet socks and cold feet, you know it sucks. It's not fun. And it's not something you want to do on a regular basis. And some of these streams are crazy during runoff, like to the point that you could be swept away and pushed into a dangerous situation if you tried to cross them. That's something to keep in mind as well when it comes to access. And then you've got mud, right? And we've talked a little bit about mud. We talked about how annoying mud is back in the spring season. And it's even worse during the summer, right? Well, at least the early summer, because there's just so much water coming down the trail. In fact, a lot of the trails that I hike this time of year, they are rivers, right? There's flowing water coming all the way down the trail the whole way up. And that necessitates really good footwear. It necessitates probably some type of stability mechanism, trekking poles, or at least being very careful so you don't slip. And it's got mud, which mud goes everywhere. It's nasty and it's slippery and it just is a whole thing. And the bottom line is there just might be cases where you can't access these lakes, even if they're open. And there's really, the ways to figure this out are trickier, right? You can look at the Copernicus site and the Sentinel satellites, and they will tell you roughly where you should expect snow to be, right? You can see where the land goes from green and brown to white and green. And you know, okay, well, that's where the snow pretty much starts. But it's not high definition enough or really the right tool to be able to tell you how much snow there is and whether or not it's navigable. To do that, you've got a couple of different options. The first one, and where I usually start, is if you're going to be near an established trail, and I want to stress, if you're going to be going up to these lakes when there's still a lot of snow on the ground, it's not a great time to be off trail. I've made that mistake before. It's not a very smart thing to do. If you're going to be dealing with heavy snow, it makes a lot more sense to be somewhere with an actual trail for safety reasons, right? And for navigational reasons, but that makes the most sense. And for that reason, I will often go and look at the most recent reviews on all trails, right? I don't love all trails for a few different reasons sometimes, but it's still a good tool. And for whatever reason, people seem to be more willing to write reviews on there than others. There are a lot of people who aren't into fly fishing who hike these trails, which means that they don't care if the lakes are frozen. In fact, they like to go up there when the lakes are frozen and take pictures and ice skate and do whatever else crazy winter people do up there when you and me are busy fishing the tailwaters down low. But they'll often write pretty good detailed reviews and tell you something, you know, like, oh, there's still a lot of snow on the trail, or there's a lot of snow past the first lake, or lost the trail a few times because of the snow and had to go find it again. They'll give you hints, right? And if you're lucky, there will be some all trails review from within a few weeks or a couple weeks that you can use, sort of base a guess on. If someone's like, oh, hell no, you're not going to make it, that might be an indication that it's time for you to go and look for a different place to go, or that you need to adjust your timing. You need to wait a few extra weeks, let that snow come off, and then maybe give it another shot. But you can start there. You can look at it, combine that with the general idea of where the snowfield starts from Copernicus, and you've got at least an idea of whether or not you can go. And then you've got the last piece, which is your Mark 1 eyeballs, right? Sometimes, and this has been the case for me so far this season, I just don't know until I get up there and look at it. I just don't. I got to go. I got to see it. I have to bring the equipment that I think I might need, even if I don't know that I need it. and I got to go stick my Mark 1 eyeballs on it and say, okay, it works or it doesn't work. I can access it or I can't access it. And that's a fine way to do it too, with the understanding that you have to make peace out of the gate with the fact that you might not fish. Okay. If you're going up, especially early summer and especially these high elevation areas, there is a non-negligible chance that you are not going to be able to reach the lake if there is snow on the ground. And there could be other reasons too, but let's stick with snow for now. And that might mean that you're going to get up there and you're going to really want to push it like I did this week, and I shouldn't have. It was a really dumb choice. And the answer is that you should just turn around. You say, no, I can't, not yet. I'm going to have to come back in a few weeks. That sucks. You spent the time to pack, to get up there, to hike up to it. I get it. It's frustrating. It frustrates me too. But going back, way back to season 1, our very first guiding principle, safety first. If you have to weigh a couple of decisions through that lens, you should always pick safety. You can always go back to that lake. You're always going to have another chance at it. If you push through it, you make a bad choice, you might only get to make one bad choice, and it could end really badly for you. So safety first, always. That is the first guiding principle that you need to keep in mind, and the very first lens that you need to stick on every decision you make. That's especially true when it comes to climbing up to these high alpine lakes. Just make peace with it. And you know what? If you can't go, then cool. Maybe you have a fallback. Maybe you can go somewhere else. You can get a half day on a local stream. And at the very least, you learn something, right? You're probably going to know that for next year and say, oh man, this one was not ready to go on June 25th. Maybe it needs until July 10th next time around. And you start building up your memory banks a little bit. And that experience is really valuable to you. Now, I should mention, going along with that one of the safest strategies for this is just not to go early, right? And by that, I mean not April and May, which is really, really early, but even June, and even in some cases, the first part of July. If you really want to be safe and you really want to know that you're probably going to be able to reach them, not 100%. Again, there are places where these snow fields and glaciers linger well into August. Some of them never leave. They never actually thaw. You can always just wait, right? And there are some people that are big advocates for just waiting until mid-July to start hitting these things. That shortens your window, right? My general belief is that you want to be done doing really high elevation stuff by the beginning of September. That's when you start seeing huge temperature plummets, freezing rain, snow. I have been snowed on in September, so yes, it does happen. And that means you're shortening your window, right? You might only get 5 or 6 weeks to get up there and hit these things. But it does mean you're not going to waste any trips. It means you're probably, in most cases, not going to need specialized equipment like snowshoes or spikes or whatever. And it might just be worth waiting, right? So if you're one of those people that's like, I don't want to burn a day doing that, and if I don't know, I'm not going to go, that's cool. Just wait a little bit longer. That's a timing question. Nothing wrong with that. So keep that in mind. Now, assuming that you can get there, you've looked at the satellites. You know the lake is open. You've checked the reviews. You've looked at the satellites again. You have prior knowledge, whatever. Or you're on the trail and you can see that you can make it. And you can actually make it to the lake. You timed it right. You might still have some issues because of fish species. Okay, so everybody talks about ice off, and ice off being, the period right after the ice comes off of a lake, as being the sort of crazy feeding frenzy for trout. And that is true. If you catch it right, you can catch a lot of fish. I've had a couple of experiences on lakes that I will catch them right as the inlet and maybe the first 10 yards of the lake are starting to open up. You can go up there and, lights out, like 100 fish, because they're hungry. They're ready to eat. Doesn't matter what you throw. Dry flies, nymphs, streamers, they're going to eat all of it. But it depends a lot on your timing and the fish species, and particularly whether or not you are looking for cutthroat. A lot of you probably know that out here in the West, cutthroat are a big deal, right? These are our native fish. We'll have a long discussion at some point about the native versus non-native stuff, which I have some pretty strong opinions about. It probably doesn't surprise you, but we'll save that for another day. But cutthroat are a big deal. They need to have really cold, really clean water to live. They're the wimps of the trout family, right? Cutthroat get their asses kicked by brookies, and brookies get their asses kicked by rainbows, and rainbows get their asses kicked by brown trout, who, at least from an evolutionary perspective, are the meanest kids on the block and the most sturdy, resilient, adaptive trout out there. Cutthroat are not like that. They got to have cold, clean water. And usually, some exceptions, you are going to find some places where you might catch cutthroat and brook trout together, although you probably not, and you probably shouldn't in a lot of cases. But they're much more fragile, and that means that they tend to live up at these higher elevations. You're only really going to find them in high elevation streams and high elevation lakes. And that's important because, number one, a lot of you are hiking up there to catch cutthroat. That's the big draw. Everybody wants that big, beautiful red belly cutthroat picture. And they are fun. Don't get me wrong. I love those fish. But you might not be able to get them even if you can access the lake and even if the ice is off the lake. And the reason for that is their spawning cycle. Okay. Now, you've probably heard of cut bows, which is a cross between a rainbow and a cutthroat. And you probably also know that rainbows spawn in the spring. Okay. Brown trout and brook trout spawn in the fall. That's why when a brown and a brook trout accidentally make a baby, you get a tiger trout. Well, same thing with cutthroat and rainbows. They both spawn in the spring, and so they can make cut bows. You get a rainbow trout and a cutthroat baby, it's a cut bow. But that's important because you're fishing sort of in the spring. I know it's the summer, but here's the really important thing. The cutthroat don't know that, right? Especially at high elevation. You got to remember that spring kind of rolls up the mountains on a timeline. Okay, so, March, April, May, that's spring for us down here at lower elevations. But that's still winter up in the mountains. Spring up in the mountains, especially at those high elevation lakes, might not start until mid-June when the ice comes off. And yeah, you might get a real brief window if you can catch it exactly right where you hit ice off and the cutthroat are ready to rock. But then they're going to go try to spawn. And, couple notes on that. Cutthroat are not good at spawning in still water. We've heard that on here from aquatic biologists, but I'm telling you too, they're not good at it. They need running water, and usually their spawning in these lakes is not successful. So, these fish are usually dropped in by airplane. They're usually not self-sustaining populations, and they're usually not able to spawn. But that doesn't stop them from trying, right? I mean, let's be real. You don't stop trying to reproduce just because you're not going to make a baby any given time. Probably. If you are, then you're probably part of a different belief system than I am. But it doesn't stop them. They still want to go do their thing. They're in romance mode. And so even though you're like, well, the rainbows have been done spawning at lower elevations for like 2 months and I've been catching them, or 3 months, and I've been killing it, for the cutthroat at 11,000 feet or 12,000 feet, spring just started. He doesn't care that it's June or July. He doesn't care about the calendar at all. And he doesn't care about you. He just wants to go and make fish love. And so they're going to be hanging out. They're going to be chasing each other in the shallows, sitting on reds, pretending to spawn. I mean, it's like a cutthroat adult film up there, right? They're up there shooting their stuff and doing their thing, and they don't care about your fly. They don't want to eat. They're really not paying attention to food. And this is why when you go up, and so many people, I've heard this from so many people, and I had the same experience myself. High-Alpine lakes can be so frustrating because you'll get up there and it's beautiful and you reach it and it's a tough hike and you're throwing the right flies. I can see the fish in this crystal clear alpine water, and damn it, they just will not eat a fly no matter what I do, to the point that some people were like, there are no fish in that lake. They just don't exist. There are no cutthroat in there because it feels like the lake is just turned off, like somebody hit a light switch. Well, that's because the cutthroat are trying to spawn, okay? And unfortunately for you, they might be trying to do that well into July, depending on the elevation here. A lot of June, you're going to find spawning cutthroat. In fact, on this trip this week, I fished the lake for a little bit for brook trout, and I'm going to talk more about them here in a second. And then I went up above it to a little stream where the cutthroat live, and I saw plenty of cutthroat, lots of sight fishing, and they were not at all interested in touching a fly. Why? Because even though it's summer for me, it's springtime, love time for them, baby, and they were just not into it. And if you hit that wrong, you're probably not going to catch any fish. Even though the water is open, even though the trail is open, you can go up there and get skunked. And in fact, I don't get skunked super duper often these days. It does happen. Sometimes I'm a middling fisherman, as I've mentioned. So there are definitely days where it doesn't work out. But most of my skunks are on high alpine lakes, and most of them are because I timed it wrong and I got up there for the cutthroat spawn. So if you get up to one of these lakes, number one, later is probably better if you're looking for cutthroat. If you think you're too early, you might be too early. I would in general be waiting until at least the 4th of July, maybe more like the middle of July, before I'm going on trips to places that have specifically and only cutthroat trout, because you might not make it happen otherwise. And if you're okay with it, that's cool. I mean, you can still hike up to the lake. You still get to take some cool pictures. You can watch the fish chase each other around and do the love dance. But if you really are only going to get to go out a few times and you want to get a cutthroat, waiting until a little bit later to give them the time to get that out of their system, it's probably a good idea. And it means that you're going to have a better fishing experience. So consider waiting. And the higher elevation the lake, the longer you should probably wait, right? If you're looking at something above 12,000 feet, it might not be a bad idea to wait till the end of July or even August before you even attempt that lake for this exact reason. I know that's tough. You're looking at an open lake on a satellite image. You want to go somewhere. Your backpack's packed. You're ready to rock. But I'm telling you, when they're spawning, they don't care about you. And you can have some real frustrating days if you're not paying attention to that. And so in practice, what that means is that the species matters, right? In most cases, you're not going to find rainbow trout and brown trout in high alpine lakes. I'm sure there are exceptions to that somewhere. I don't know of any off the top of my head, but I'm sure they exist somewhere. But probably you're not going to find them. The cutthroat are busy doing their thing, as we mentioned, and that means that you need to be looking at brook trout. Now, I'm going to say a few controversial things here that some of you will probably yell at me for. Number one, I know that a lot of you are going to go, oh, brook trout are disgusting invasive species and I hate them and they should all just be thrown in the woods to die. I don't agree with you. Brook trout have been in Colorado since before Colorado was a state. They might not be native to here, but they are naturalized at a level that I think they're okay. They have survived very well. I don't have a problem with segregating brook trout and cutthroat trout to protect native cutthroat. I do have a problem with generalized hatred of brook trout and the unnecessary killing of every brook trout you see, in part because I think it's sort of inhumane and brutal for no particular reason, in part because I don't think it makes any difference. No offense, but no matter how good you think you are at fishing, you're not going to catch enough brook trout to stop them from reproducing and continuing to exist. It's probably just not going to happen. Sorry to be the one who tells you that. And number three, I really like brook trout. So there you go. I said it. I like fishing for brook trout. I like catching brook trout. I think brook trout are prettier than cutthroat. Oh my goodness. You guys heard me say that out loud. I'm sure somebody is going to attempt to assassinate me for that. But as much as I love cutthroat, and they are fun, and I do chase them, I really love brookies. They're like paintings. I mean, if God sat down and painted a freshwater fish and was like, man, I'm going to make them kind of this black silver thing, and they're going to have red dots, and there's some blue, then they're going to have these vermiculations over the top of them, and the tiger stripes, and the white strip down a red fin. I mean, these things they're art. They're beautiful. They really are. They are the most beautiful freshwater fish, I believe, in the world. And I love catching them. They're also eager. Brook trout are just fun. They'll eat streamers. They'll eat dry flies. They'll eat nymphs. They just want to eat everything. And yeah, they don't get very big, right? I mean, you might get lucky and catch a 12-inch brook trout, which is a monster in a lot of these places, but they're eager. And what they don't have in size, they make up for in sport. And so I love fishing for brook trout. And if I'm fishing early in the season in high alpine lakes, I'm looking for lakes that have predominantly brook trout in them. If they have cutthroat in them that have somehow managed to survive that competition, cool. Maybe I'll catch a bonus cutthroat if I get lucky. But if they don't, I'm perfectly happy catching brookies. I love those little guys. And if you're going to go up early to these high alpine lakes, I really strongly recommend that you look for lakes that have brook trout in them, because brook trout spawn in the fall. They're done making babies. They've done their thing. The ice has come off. They're ready to eat and hang out. They're ready to be trout for the summer. They're ready to go. Cutthroat are still doing their, lazy romantic day in bed thing with each other. The brookies are ready to rock. And so if you're going to go early season and you're like, okay, the ice is off and the trail is open, but it's still, it might be kind of spawning window for those cutthroat, go find a brookie lake or a brookie stream and have a blast. You're going to have so much fun doing it. That's my trick for it. The species in those lakes really matters. It can have a huge impact on the success of your day. Now, with all of that said, that kind of covers the general considerations of your high alpine trips and how to think about them, how to plan them, and how to time them-ish. It's more art than science. Admittedly, I wish I could tell you, hey, on July 7th, go to this place and do this thing. But I can't. And even if I could, I wouldn't, because it would defeat the purpose, right? The whole point of this is to go out and earn it and learn it yourself. But even if I wanted to, I couldn't. And that means that, you're going to have to come up with your own system using some of these tools to decide when you can get out and start really hitting high alpine for the lake season, especially in the high country. A couple other quick plugs that I'll give you on this one. Timing matters both in terms of when you go, as far as the month or the week that you go, the date that you go, I should say, but it also matters based on time of day. Okay, and a lot of people ignore this. I have seen so many guys hiking up with fly rods at like 1 p.m. with thunderclouds rolling over the top of a cirque that are going to blow them up and potentially put them in a dangerous situation. You are going to be on top of mountains when you go high alpine fishing, right? That's the high and the alpine part of that word. And storms up there can come in very, very quickly, and they can be very, very violent. We just had a couple of guys here in Colorado get struck by lightning. It's necessitated the highest helicopter rescue in Colorado history because they were being ding-dongs on the summit of a mountain. You don't want to be up there during a thunderstorm. If you're below tree line, and some of these lakes are below tree line, maybe you can ride it out. I still probably wouldn't want to in a lot of cases, but maybe you could. If you're above tree line, you definitely don't want to do that. Trust me, the first time you get stuck in a serious electrical storm above tree line with no cover, you're going to realize pretty quickly that you never want to have that experience again. And that means, because there's not a storm every afternoon, but there's a storm a lot of afternoons, right? Almost every afternoon there's some type of weather, and it can happen really quickly. The general rule of thumb for you as a high elevation fly fisher is the same as it is for somebody who's trying to summit a 14er or hiking a big mountain. You need to start early, right? And you need to be off the lake early, okay? And that means that you either need to get up early and drive to the trailhead and hike, and I do that a lot for day trips. I might wake up at 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. and hit the road so I'm hiking. Or you might decide to camp, right? So you can go camp right below the lake just for a night. You can hike up the day before, spend the night below tree line, hang out in a tent, eat, sleep, whatever you do, and then wake up early in the morning and go fish. That works too. But in any case, you should plan to need to be off the lake by noon. Okay, and there might be exceptions. Maybe you get lucky, you get a bluebird day and it's perfect all afternoon. Cool, you got lucky. Thank your lucky stars. But in most cases, that might not happen. And even in the cases where it does, you can have a storm miss you and it blows by you and you're like, haha, you missed me. And then you can have another one come right over the mountain and nail you. And I cannot tell you how many times I've seen a storm blow by me. I even have a rule for it. I think it's like nature's law. If the first storm misses you, the second one will not. You need to be prepared for that. And on top of that, you could have no storm, blue skies, fishing, having a great time, and then suddenly a wall of violence comes over the top of those mountains that you can't see, right? You're high up there, but you're blocked in by these cirques and these bowls and cornices and ridge lines, and you really can't see what's coming until it's practically on top of you. And by the time it's on top of you, you're in trouble, right? If you can hear thunder, you're close enough to be struck by lightning. That's true. And it's really just better not to chance it. So plan to be up early, plan to be on the lake early, and then plan to get off the lake early. And if you get lucky, you get lucky, but most of the time you're probably not going to get lucky, and you're going to want to get off early to be safe, because you really don't want to be waving a 9-foot graphite pole around an electrical storm. And if you choose to do that anyway, because catching a trout is more important to you than your life, and you get struck by lightning, number one, that's a huge waste. And number two, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, guys. You need to make better choices, because bad things can happen. And if you think the fly fishermen don't get struck by lightning, you're crazy, because it happens on a pretty regular basis in the high country. So please be smart and plan to be off early. And you probably want to be off early anyway, because high altitude messes with you, right? So even if you're from a higher altitude area, once you get up there, you're talking about massive physiological impacts, okay? At 11,000 feet, you only have about 66% of the oxygen that you would have at sea level, okay? So that's a 33%, 1/3 drop of the amount of oxygen available to you. That means that you're getting less oxygen in your bloodstream every time you take a breath. It means that your VO2 max, your sort of cardio ability, your ability to process oxygen and exercise, keeps dropping by about 10% the higher up you go. So every 3,000 feet you go up, your VO2 max drops by 10%. That means that you are not as fit as you were when you were lower. You get tired more easily. Your heart rate is elevated. You could have shortness of breath. And here's the really important thing. You can start dealing with cognitive impairment. Now, look, I'm already cognitively impaired, right? So you don't have to worry as much about it with me. But you're probably super smart. The problem is at elevation with that lower oxygen coupled with exhaustion, you're going to start getting tired and you're going to start having serious issues with cognition. Your reaction time is going to get slower. Your focus is going to decrease. You're going to start to feel tired. One of my first symptoms of AMS, acute mountain sickness, or elevation effects is that I get fatigued and I get tired. You're going to get worse at solving problems. And if you're not careful, you're going to start making bad decisions. And you're not going to know they're bad decisions because you're cognitively impaired. And so even setting aside the weather, you don't want to spend incredibly long times at these higher elevations because it's not good for you and you can start making bad choices, right? And there's a whole bunch of other stuff here too. At some point, maybe we'll do an episode with a medical professional about the effects of altitude on people. But, you've got various types of altitude sickness that can range from being really unpleasant to being very dangerous. You need more calories, which necessitates packing more food, going back to the self-reliance episode last week. You need more water to stay functional, which increases your dehydration risk. And it can just start to get hairy for you. So when you go to these lakes, understand timing matters. You need to be up there early and off early and expect a shorter window. You're probably not going to be fishing up there for 8 hours. You're probably not. You're just not going to feel good. If you're hanging out at 11,000 or 12,000 feet, you might only be on the lake for 2 or 3 hours. In fact, I very often am only on these lakes for a few hours before I come back down and move on to do other stuff because it just is a lot on your body. And you couple that with weather and everything else, you just got to be smart. You got to make good decisions. And again, guiding principle number 1, safety first. Hanging out exhausted and impaired at high elevation when you really don't need to be doing that and should have planned better, it's not the best thing to do. So keep that in mind. That type of timing matters too. And I think that about covers it. I can probably stop talking about this at this stage. We will have an episode about tactics and how to actually fish these high alpine streams and lakes. So I'm looking forward to doing that here this season. But this one will at least give you a sense of how to plan those trips because I know I get that question a lot. I know it's a big question mark. It was for me when I was first starting out. And I hope this episode has helped at least partially answer that question so you can start laying out some really awesome trips for your summer in the mountains. So with that, guys, I hope you're having a great week. Hope you're out there hiking, getting some sun, catching some fish, doing your thing. And I'll see you back here real soon. Till next time, this is Ross. Maybe I'll see you out there. Unless you got the timing wrong.